Good news, everyone! Tonight, more trans and GSM voices, one red state trans teen story, international news, and more. Good News starts right now. It's very good news that there are more trans voices than ever speaking openly about transgender topics, advocating for gender and sexual minorities, and, most of all, existing in public and thriving. To celebrate this fact and to keep it in focus, I've added a Creator of the Week feature to Good News. This week, we're turning the spotlight to Samantha Lux, who just returned to YouTube after a hiatus. She is best known for videos that prominently showcase the correcting of misinformation about trans and GSM people, speaking candidly about trans healthcare and her own transition, and her infamous appearance on one of the most widely reviewed Jubilee debates ever. Tune in every week to find more trans voices you may not have heard about. For trans teens trapped in red states, the consequences of bigotry bills can be catastrophic. For a lucky few, there's a ray of hope in escape. From NPR, meet Veronica, a 17-year-old from Iowa with 2 more years of high school to go before she can leave. Her Iowa hometown has turned out to be a punishing place to be a trans teen. Her mom, Emily, has fought to change her name in the high school system. There's no bathroom for her to use at school. Emily says neighbors and classmates alike have made cruel comments. Iowa, of course, is part of the 26 states that have laws on the books banning gender-affirming care for trans teens, affecting an estimated 110,000 teenagers across the United States. Virtually all major U.S. medical organizations, including the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics, support access to gender-affirming care for young people. Despite that, and warnings from medical professionals against the dire consequences of such bans, Iowa's ban took effect in March of 2023. Teenagers like Veronica, who were in the middle of treatment, had a few months to either find an out-of-state way to get care or have their treatment stopped. Emily said, "You never think as a mom, I can't wait for my kid to grow up and leave the state, but that's where I'm at right now." For now, the family is rooted in Iowa. Veronica is the oldest of 4 children. Her parents are divorced, and the kids are at their dad's house in the same neighborhood half of the time. So when the gender-affirming care ban took effect last year, the family had to make a decision. The result was that Veronica and her mom would travel out of state every few months to keep getting the care Veronica needed. To make Veronica's appointments in Minnesota, they have over 4 hours of driving to do. During their travels, they take the opportunity to talk. Emily tells of how before Veronica came out as trans, she sensed it. She said she remembers the specific moment that she realized a transgender woman came and spoke to a class that she was taking in 2017. Quote, "It was like I was hit by a bolt of lightning. I was like, this is my child. I know this in my soul and in my heart." She said, "I was kind of just waiting to hear." Years passed. Quietly, Veronica told her friends that she was trans in 2020, but held off from telling her parents. She said, quote, "I just kind of held it between me and them during that time. I wanted to be sure about it, you know? I didn't want to jump into something I wasn't sure about and tell everyone, and then later have to say, oh wait, never mind." Which kind of puts the lie to that propaganda about how kids are being pushed into things and change their mind back and forth all willy-nilly. Many trans kids want to be bloody sure. She said a year later, she was finally ready to talk. Quote, "I was like, okay, it's been a year, nothing has changed." And she started 8th grade with her new name. Even though her mom was expecting it, she said, quote, when Veronica came out to me, I had such a mix of emotions. I had this part of me that was like a cheerleader. Let's do this. Let's get the flag in the yard. And then there is the mom part that felt so afraid of the targeting, the bullying, and all the terrible statistics for this marginalized group. It was scary. Iowa is where Emily grew up and where she chose to raise her own family. Then, her home state started to pass laws affecting that family. In March 2023, the state passed a law dictating which bathrooms students can use at school, and another banning gender-affirming care for minors. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds said, quote, "We need to just pause. We need to understand what these emerging therapies actually may do to our kids," as she signed the bill determining what would be done to kids. That she had been forewarned would definitely end trans kids' lives. She said, quote, "My heart goes out to them. I'm a parent. I'm a grandmother. I know how difficult this is. This is an extremely uncomfortable position for me to be in." When the ban took effect, Veronica was taking puberty blockers. By that point, she had been out to her friends for 3 years and to her parents and siblings for 2. She'd also developed an eating disorder so severe she'd gone to residential treatment twice. Her mom, Emily, is pretty sure those things are related. She said, quote, "I wonder if just knowing that you don't want to use the bathroom at school, so a way to avoid using the bathroom would be to not drink and not eat during the day." The pause in gender-affirming care, as Iowa's governor put it, was at odds with Veronica's own best interests. The ban became law, and the family got a message from the clinic explaining that they needed to stop Veronica's gender care. Her doctor said that if she couldn't find a way to keep getting puberty blocker shots on time out of state, she would be forced into testosterone-driven puberty. That would mean bodily changes like voice deepening, growth of her Adam's apple, facial hair, shoulder broadening, and more, some of which would require surgery later in life to fix. Some would be permanent. Veronica was lucky in that her mother never doubted for a minute that they would find a way. Many others are not so fortunate. Emily says that her family's path forward was always clear. Quote, "It was just never a thought that we wouldn't continue." She said the idea that legislators are making medical decisions for her family doesn't seem right. So their first order of business was continuing puberty-blocking shots, which Veronica needs every couple of months at an in-person appointment. Then in December of last year, her new doctor started her on hormone therapy. She started taking daily pills of estradiol while continuing T blockers in order to keep her testosterone down. Only since then has she begun a very late start, but a female puberty. This month's appointment was their third in Minneapolis. Her mom thinks intervening now will help Veronica look more like someone who is born female when she's older, which will hopefully make her safer, less likely to be the target of violence or discrimination for being a trans person. Veronica is really happy with all of it. She said, quote, "I feel like it's helped me feel a lot better about my body." Emily said that since starting the estradiol, Veronica has been much more social, out and about with the friends. She seems happier. Veronica's pediatrician, whose name is withheld for their protection and security, obviously, said that he's pleased with how her gender care is going. Quote, "She's having the result that we hoped she would have, which is feeling more at peace with her body and being seen by people the way she sees herself and wants to be seen. Not all gender-diverse teens want these kind of medical interventions," he notes. Quote, "The medical piece of gender care is all driven by patient goals and embodiment goals, and the truth is, not everybody wants this kind of binary transition." In Veronica's case, her vital signs and mental health have also improved since her appointment last spring. Quote, "She's doing well. In an ideal world, I would see her more often, but it is a burden for her to get here," the doctor said. 3 of the 4 states bordering Minnesota have gender-affirming care bans for youth: Iowa, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Last year, the state passed a trans refuge law, and since then, hundreds of trans people and their families have moved to the state. But more on that later. Unfortunately, not every family can move. Even traveling for appointments is difficult, with airfare or gas expenses, hotels, taking time off of work, family arrangements, and so forth. For Veronica's family, moving is not presently possible, but traveling, although grueling, is an option. Her doctor says that she is one of 15 patients he's currently treating for gender dysphoria who travel in from out of state. Her mom says part of what makes the travel tolerable is that Veronica will turn 18 next summer. Quote, then hopefully she can have more freedoms and have access to more care in Iowa, assuming the laws don't change before then. After their appointment at the clinic, Veronica and Emily stopped by a pharmacy in Minneapolis to pick up a 6-month supply of estradiol. That's because they can't get their prescription filled in their home state because of the healthcare ban. Then it's back on the highway for the long return trip toward Des Moines. As they cross the state boundary, Emily points out the Welcome to Iowa sign with the tagline, Freedom to Flourish, saying, quote, should have a little asterisk by that. While one state fails its residents, another protects them and their neighbors. How did Tim Walz's Minnesota become a trans sanctuary in the first place, and what impact does that have? From WPRL. When Tim Walz was announced as Vice President Harris's running mate, former President Trump said on Fox, quote, he's very heavy into transgender. Anything transgender he thinks is great. Trump has pledged, if elected, to end gender-affirming care for citizens at every age. In Arizona earlier this month, Trump's own running mate, J.D. Vance, falsely claimed the trans refuge law that Walz signed allows the state to take children away from parents. To understand the truth, we first have to understand how the laws came to be passed in the first place. Like everything else in Minnesota, the political spectrum runs purple. However, in 2022, voters elected Democratic majorities in both houses of the legislature and to the governor's mansion. It was the first Democratic domination in a decade, and lawmakers came with a list of priorities. Making the state a trans refuge wasn't on that list, but along with the blue wave riding into office came freshman Representative Leah Fink, the first transgender member of Minnesota State Legislature, and she made sure it got added. She said, quote, I knew that we had to do something because the national coordinated anti-trans wave was building steam. In 2023, between January and May, 15 states across the country enacted laws banning gender-affirming care for youth, including Minnesota's neighboring states of Iowa, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Fink says the dominoes fell in 2023. The self-evident urgency became clear to the members of the Minnesota legislature. Tim Walz, from the governor's mansion, was an active ally in the effort to protect transgender people in the state and not a newcomer to the issues, Fink says. Quote, Walz is a teacher, and his history includes being the Gay Straight Alliance advisor at Mankato West High School. People who are around young people and have seen what it means to deny people their authentic fullness, they understand. Fink says he was clear-eyed in his support for this all along, quickly signing an executive order to put some protections in place in case the bill didn't get through the legislature. The day of the vote in the House, protesters for and against the bill filled the state capitol. Debate on the floor was contentious and many hours long. Quote, we voted at 5:45 in the morning in the House. It was a filibuster kind of situation, and everybody stayed up and made it happen. In the end, the bill passed in both the House and the Senate, and only 2 Democrats across the legislature voted against it. Walz signed that bill, along with a bill protecting access to abortion and banning conversion therapy. As he signed, he murmured, love wins, and handed one pen to preteen Hildy Edwards, who had testified in support of the trans refuge law, and another to Representative Finke. The text of the law protects the privacy of both patients and clinicians when it comes to gender-affirming care in Minnesota. If you are trying to access health care for transition-related reasons, you can access that care in Minnesota no matter where you live, and while you're in the state of Minnesota, Their laws will protect you, Finke explains. The law also protects medical providers from out-of-state subpoenas. Finke points to how Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton tried to get medical records for transgender Texans from Seattle Children's Hospital. Quote, under our bill, the Attorney General is tasked with protecting people in Minnesota who receive gender-affirming care, she says. So hospitals and doctors in this state don't need to worry about that kind of effort. The provision of the law that noted fabricator of stories J.D. Vance pointed to when he claimed that the state could kidnap kids, in fact pertains to custody cases heard in family court in Minnesota, where judges can issue temporary protection orders but does not determine which parent gets custody or hand custody to the state. Many trans people and their families in states with bans feel like they're being driven out, which is the point. This kind of soft genocide, which forces a group out of a particular territory or leads to the conditions that result in their deaths, is considered an actual war crime. And yet 26 states in America have passed such laws under the guise of protecting children. Given the circumstances, Representative Finke says this is much more tragic than celebratory. Hundreds of families within the first 6 months moved to Minnesota, Finke said, and as the election gets closer, we're getting more and more. She said trans people and their families are worried about what another Trump presidency could mean for trans rights, not just in relation to their access to health care, but military service, housing and employment discrimination, and many other issues. Since Minnesota's law took effect last spring, it has affected healthcare providers in the state. Children's Minnesota, which runs a gender program for youth, has seen an increase of about 30% in calls from patients in neighboring states. Some families who can't relocate end up driving hundreds of miles to see gender-affirming care providers in Minnesota, like Veronica from our previous story. Some of the earliest transaction for civil rights was done in Minnesota, she adds. In 1978, there was a case argued by the ACLU for a trans woman in the Army to be able to stay and keep her job. Minnesota was the first state to protect trans people in our Human Rights Act. It's always been a part of the fabric here. Last year, she was named the USA Today Woman of the Year for Minnesota, and she was recognized as a health hero by Children's Minnesota. She is happy that there's more representation of trans people in public life than when she was growing up in the 80s and 90s in suburban Minnesota. Quote, "You can't be what you can't see," she said, noting that she didn't come out as trans until adulthood. Quote, "I'm so grateful that I did. And I'm so grateful that I get to be in a position now where other people can see not just that there are trans people, but that we're succeeding." And in international news, meet a South African trans refugee who is standing the fuck up. From Mamba. Thomars Shamoyarira is a proudly out trans man from Zimbabwe. Despite enduring immense adversity, including being disowned by his family and forced to flee his country due to his identity, Thomars has emerged as a leading advocate for LGBTQ+ refugees in South Africa. As the founder of The Fruit Basket, an organization committed to supporting GSM refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers, Thomars has become a beacon of hope for many displaced individuals. His advocacy takes place within the context of a dysfunctional and dehumanizing asylum system in South Africa, which, instead of providing refuge to LGBT individuals fleeing persecution across Africa, often subjects them to further discrimination and bureaucratic hurdles when seeking legal status. Beyond advocacy, the Fruit Basket offers direct support to help restore dignity to this marginalized community through skill development programs, relief services, and the operation of 2 safe houses in Johannesburg. In an interview, Thomars shared his personal journey of self-discovery, the obstacles he's overcome, and his vital work uplifting GSM refugees. His story is one of resilience, courage, and unwavering commitment to the well-being of the most marginalized. On growing up in Zimbabwe, he said, "I had a good childhood and upbringing. However, things became difficult when I turned 13. At the time, I was struggling with my newfound independence and feelings for girls that I didn't fully understand. It was overwhelming for me at that young age. My grades dropped, and I never quite managed to get back on track after that. When I reached puberty, I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. Conversations about sexuality or gender identity were completely absent in my environment. And even if I had wanted to discuss it, I didn't have the language to do so at the time. The only time I ever heard anything related to homosexuality was when people made fun of the late former Vice President Kanan Banana, who was rumored to be gay. The discussions were always derogatory and never in detail, just rude, dismissive remarks. I had to keep deep feelings for my best friend in high school, feelings that went beyond friendship, hidden. I wanted her to be my girlfriend, but I didn't know how to say it. I had never heard of the concept of a girl loving another girl romantically. Looking back, I realized I always knew who I was, but I could only vocalize it after finishing high school. I eventually told her how I felt. Unfortunately for me, while I was fully invested emotionally, she saw it as just teenage experimentation and fun. She broke my heart. I got over it eventually, and we're friends again today, even though we live on different continents now. Patriarchy still dominates in Zimbabwe. There are strict expectations around how women and men should dress, behave, and express themselves. If you step outside those norms and gender binaries, you're ridiculed and judged, making life incredibly difficult. You're forced to conform to what makes others comfortable, even if it means compromising your own identity. I remember one day a soldier in a uniform carrying a large firearm told me to let go of my girlfriend's hand or he would cut off both of our hands. Many others in Zimbabwe share the same kinds of feelings. We were so terrified that we let go of each other and quickly left the area. Being different is not embraced in Zimbabwe. Even in 2024, things like tattoos or piercings are still seen as unacceptable or bad. For a long time, Thomars said, I identified as a masculine lesbian, but I always felt that my sexuality wasn't the full picture, that there was more to it. Once again, the issue was the language. When I eventually discovered GALZ, a leading GSM community in Zimbabwe, and connected with the Zimbabwe queer and trans community, I started learning new terms. Over the years, I've identified with almost every letter in the LGBTQIA+ acronym, but now I know that I am a pansexual transgender man, Thomars said. However, circumstances in Zimbabwe after that discovery resulted in Thomars having to flee. It was only after moving to South Africa that he finally came across the term transgender. He had finally found the language he'd been searching for all these years. Coming out a second time was almost as difficult as the first. He said the difference was that the second time around, there was no one left to disown him. Since 2015, he has been living as his true and authentic self, and has never looked back. As a lesbian woman, he was outed and disowned, but Thomars came out for himself. He was now fearless, independent, and genuinely happy. Although the social and medical transition was not easy, embracing himself as a trans man brought a deep sense of fulfillment and clarity. He said his own lived experience served as motivation, and he'd always had a passion for serving others. But in 2016, his work really took off. About that time, his lack of legal status drove him to question the struggles faced by others who were even more disadvantaged in terms of access to support. His passion for helping others, combined with the frustration of not being able to find assistance, led to the creation of the Fruit Basket. He said that's enabled him to create a platform where refugees can easily access support with their needs at the forefront. Responding to community emergencies and filling critical gaps has been some of his proudest accomplishments. Their 2 safe houses winning the UNHCR 2020 NGO Innovation Award, and their work during COVID being nominated for the 2023 Further Award for Role Model of the Year are all major milestones. They were also invited to participate in the Global Refugee Forum by the United Nations. Thomars said trans men tend to be overlooked in many conversations around gender diversity and rights. At the Fruit Basket, they're actively addressing this issue. They're currently working on a project specifically focused on advocating for the inclusion of trans men in various programs and services, ensuring their voices and needs are not sidelined. The goal is to make sure that trans men are represented and included in all relevant spaces, whether it's in activism, policymaking, or community support, so that they can collectively address the unique struggles that come with being a trans man in a world that often overlooks them. He said he sees his work and activism with the fruit basket as a calling. While it can be exhausting, it's incredibly rewarding. There's nothing quite like seeing someone smile and knowing that he played a part in that. The occasional messages of gratitude he receives also give him the motivation to keep going. Many of the residents of the safe houses call him Papa. As someone who doesn't have biological children, having this chosen family is really special. Being a guardian and father figure to them is deeply motivating, especially since many have been disowned by their families as well. In a way, he's helping to fill those emotional gaps. South Africa does have some of the most progressive laws for protecting gender and sexual minority individuals on the African continent and stands as a global contender in that regard. However, the reality on the ground is a little different. There have been 16 GSM murders across the country since January. This raises serious questions about the safety of GSM refugees, especially when the local community members are not themselves safe. The lack of legal status severely limits their access to basic services and fundamental human rights. There is a pressing need for advocacy to protect GSM refugees, as living without legal status exposes the community to a myriad of human rights violations and daily abuses. South Africa has the potential to become a safe haven for GSM refugees, and coordinated efforts can help turn this vision into a reality. And that, along with the Fruit Basket's other efforts, are something that you can help with. You can find the organization at thefruitbasket.org.za. Thomars concluded by saying, abusing power isn't just about using it for personal gain or to harm others. It's also about not using the power you have when you should. When you fail to use your power, people suffer. For example, churches have power but are not speaking out against xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia, and other harm when they see it. The best way to fight hate is with love, and who better to spread love than the church? Please use your power to help save lives. And that is something that we all can help with. You can find out more, including ways that you can contribute, by visiting thefruitbasket.org.za. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe. Also, support our work by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TheTransPositions and harvest boons like a boss. Our meme of the week was posted by yours truly. And if you want to annihilate your enemies in a way that doesn't violate TOS, join us on Discord. Also, if you have good news concerning trans people you'd like to see reported on, you can tell us about that in the Discord as well. For the Transpositions, I've been Ember Belrad.